Hey, what's up? Uh, I'm Andrew McFadyen-Ketchum. Thank you, Lana, for having my book in your class, and thank you to all of you who read it. And I understand you've emulated some of the poems. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. I'd love to see those. In fact, you should send them to me. That would be cool. So, okay. I'm just gonna go through question by question, and just shoot from the hip. I don't have any plan. I haven't looked at the questions. Just you know, we'll act like this is a Q&A at the end of a reading. So Jacob Boynton, do you have a writing process and or specific setup you like when writing? If so, can you share those? Um, Forgive my dog in the background. I wrote this book while more or less while living in a tent. I lived in a tent for 2 years after my divorce, as a way to sort of just live a different way, get out of. I didn't want to pay rent or anything, and so I would set up this big tent in people's yards where I was allowed to. And the lion's share of this book, I would say, I wrote when I was living in Los Osos, California. Um, it's right on the coast. It's sort of equidistant between San Francisco and Los Angeles. I was living in it's the beach is 5 minutes was five a 5 minute walk from where I had my tent pitched in a friend of a friend's backyard. Luke Johnson, actually, his like childhood friend, offered the backyard, and so I would get up when the sun came up, which was 5, 6 in the morning, whatever that was, and I would walk 6 blocks or whatever, to the Starbucks. This is a small town. There was one coffee shop that was independent, and then a Starbucks, and the independent one wasn't so great. That something about the Starbucks I really liked, and I would read poetry and I would write it. Usually, from 6 to like noon or 2 or something, and I would go back to the tent and like get lunch and like then like do work I had to do. So and that was not so dissimilar to my process in graduate school. I mean, I would get up at 6 a.m. and when I was a kid, my first job, I had to be there at 6 a.m. every morning, and so there's just something about like getting up that early, and it was it was like you were at work. And so I spent a lot of time reading and writing. I would do that. I did that every day for basically 9 months. So the lion's share of the book got written that way, but then I went to other places and did essentially the same thing. A specific setup when I'm writing. Well, I guess I do like to be comfortable. I don't like to sit at a desk. I like to sit on a couch or like a love seat, something like that. I tend to like to be around some people, so a coffee shop is a good option. Though I also will just completely do it in isolation as well, and I'll usually listen to some, like really like airy music, like something without lyrics, or maybe something like opera, that's not in English, and just sort of drown out everything. Okay, good question. Brittany Barmaki, forgive me. I've never seen that name before. That's a unique one. One, certain pieces deal with weighty emotional issues. I feel like all of them do. Do you find writing these cathartic, or that they bring closure in some way, or are certain things still a gut punch to reread or revisit? It's kind of all of the above. I mean, I just gave a reading in Lexington, Kentucky, like on Thursday, and I read one about my mom and it was like, I mean, I started like crying, and so I mean, like with this book, like I sort of climbed out of the dark place and found my family and my wife and things like that. So like it all worked out. So it's pretty cathartic, I would say. But it certainly brings back a lot of feelings. Like I read some poems about my ex-wife, which are not negative about her, but that was kind of funny because I was like, man, if you read these a certain way, they're awfully like bitter, And I mean, I was bitter. I definitely was not happy with how things went down, and I don't feel that way at all anymore. It actually made me laugh. I was like, man, these are rough. But yeah, so it's sort of like all of the above. A lot of poetry generally seems to come from pain or darker places. Many of the poems in Fight or Flight read as being from someone experiencing happiness but not knowing or wanting to lean all the way into that. Almost in a Casey Musgraves happy and sad way. Is there anything to that, or why do you think that is? Let me read that again. Many of the poems in Fight or Flight read as being from someone experiencing happiness but not knowing or wanting to lean all the way into that. Well, I'll tell you, when I was writing them, there were times when I was really unhappy, but I finally got to Karen, who I married almost a year ago. And we have 3 kids. They're her kids, my stepkids. And so a lot of the work of the book was done as I was getting to know her. And a lot of it was getting finished and completed when I we were what's the word? Committed, like we were like dating, but it was just us. I just cannot come up with the word right now. It's 10 o'clock at night on a Sunday. I'm a little tired. So I was very happy, but I was also like still sort of like dealing with the trauma, thus the title Fight or Flight, the trauma of the divorce and other things that were going on in my life. And there's a lot of fear related to our relationship. Like, there were kids involved who were not mine, and like there was an ex-husband, and there was all this stuff, and so it was like I was very happy, but it was a little hard to fully embrace and accept it, and it was just a matter of time. I just had to just keep living with her and having being part of the kids' lives and all that stuff, and also just getting past the divorce and getting past some of the other traumas the book are about. Which I am past the divorce. I'm not past the traumas, the family trauma stuff. I'm not past that at all. Actually, not even close. Getting past that initial failure to build a family, because that's what I've always wanted, is to have children and have a good wife and all those good things. Getting past the failure to do that is, I think, definitely very much present in the book. That's a pretty interesting analysis of the book, by the way. I hadn't really thought about that. That's why I kind of got wide-eyed. So good question. Good reading. Okay, Michael Herman. What's the first thing, underlined and emboldened, that you think about when you begin writing a book? I'm laughing because I'm like, I don't know. That's not really fair. So my second book, I did intentionally write that one. Like, I knew what I wanted my subject to be, and that was the suicide of one of my best friends growing up. Like, in graduate school, I conceived of the idea that I should write a book purely about her, which, by the way, don't ever do that. Don't ever decide to write a book purely about someone who killed themselves. That's very, very intense. But I'm kidding, of course, to do that. But, And so I went, I literally wrote a poem in the middle of grad school that I knew I needed to write. That was this big, complicated poem. One of the main poems in Visiting Hours. It's called Marisarius. It's like 10 pages, and it sort of sets the whole logic of the book. I literally stopped everything in grad school and wrote that poem, and then went back to completing my first manuscript. So that I guess the first thing I thought then was, this is what I want to write about. My first book, it just sort of came. I was just writing poems in graduate school because that's what I was there to do, and retelling one of my father's favorite stories. He's this great storyteller. He loves to tell stories to groups of people, and I versified one, and everybody went, "Wow, this is really cool." And I was like, "Well, I've got more," and they were like, "You should write a book about that." So and then so I wrote 5 of those poems, and then built around it all the poems from my childhood, things about my childhood. So it was so I guess I was thinking about writing about growing up with my dad. This one, so this one came differently. I didn't know I was going to write about my divorce, which I don't guess I technically wrote much about it, but to me, the book is certainly about the divorce and finding my family. But it's about a lot of different things, I guess. This one, I actually had a poetic goal. It wasn't like, here's what I want to write about, or here's where I want to be when I'm writing. It was, I wanted to write smaller poems, because my first two books have a lot of big poems. They have the smaller ones, but a lot of the big poems are the ones that people remember. No one really remembers the short ones. I guess that's not true, but somewhat true. So I wanted to write smaller poems that, and this sounds insulting, but I mean it in the nicest way, that like my mother could understand. And by that I don't mean like she's like not smart. What I mean is just like, basically I wanted it to be poetry that people who don't read and write poetry could read and go, oh, I like that, or I get that, or I understand what's going on here. And so like, I'm not sure exactly how to phrase that without sort of sounding, a little bit like an asshole, but like I just wanted my next door neighbor to be like, gosh, I read this poem and I really liked it. That's what I was going for. And part of that to me was length. It was like, they need to be a page or less. Now there's a couple of poems that are longer, but almost every poem is a page. Everything, in most cases, it's very clear, it's straightforward. So that was what I had in mind. And that goal led to, I think, the poems that came to exist, for sure. 2, how does this change, if at all, over the course of the time spent on the book? So how does like what you're trying to do change? Not much. I mean, with my second book, the whole goal to write about her, that never changed. I didn't deviate from that. There's not a single poem that's not about her in there. My third book, Fight or Flight, actually, so one of the things I was also working toward / against in Fight or Flight was my other two books are like very like narrative and chronological. And I just really was like, I don't want to write another book that's chronological or like tells a story. I wanted it to be poems about grief and trauma, but not have any connection poem to poem necessarily. And I worked against choreography, you could sort of say. Like I didn't want to choreograph it. And I worked for, 2 or 3 years really hard on that. And then I got really sick, and I was stuck in a hospital for like a week, and there's nothing to do. And I was able to get, my wife brought me a printed out copy of the book. And one thing that's great about hospital rooms is like they actually have a lot of floor space when so that all the people can stand around you and poke you and prod you and whatnot. When they're not there, there's a lot of room. And so I laid out the poems, page by page by page, and immediately went back to chronology and choreography. And it was like the bing. It's like when the book really hit was when I finally said, okay, I've tried arranging this in a way that isn't chronological, that isn't narrative, that isn't, my divorce, going on the journey, finding my wife, and finally I gave up on that and just did that. And the book like changed in an instant. So that's a really good question. I hadn't really thought about it, but yes, I definitely changed my approach. What I want to say about all that is like, if I had found a way to put the book together that was not chronological, not narrative, then I would have done it. But I couldn't find it because the bottom line is it's a chronological narrative book. It just is what it is. But working against that was actually a really good thing to do. I think that one thing, that I would be thinking about where you are in your writing journey is like everything that everything that comes along is of value. So even if you have a professor who wants you to do something you really don't like, you're like, no, I don't want to do that. It's ruining my poem. Like, do it. Just see where it takes you. And, the journey back to where you should have been to start with is probably just as important as the journey you wouldn't have taken if you just stayed there. So it was a good thing to do, even though I abandoned it entirely as a goal. All right, Seth, Don't know how to say this one either. Avignon? That's a guess. I've never seen that name either. I mean, I've been professing since 2006, so I've seen most names. I don't know how to say that one. When choosing the title for Fight or Flight, did you have other titles in mind, and how difficult was that decision process? I don't think. Hey, honey?
Yes.
Did I ever have any other titles for Fight or Flight?
No. You did for
No.
16 hours.
Lana, she's not here, but she does want you to stick your head in. Can you stick your head in and say hi?
Oh my gosh.
She's
Maybe.
it's right here. Hold on. Okay, come here. There you are. Okay. No, I didn't have any other titles. When did I come up with the title Fight or Flight? I don't remember.
I think it was in 2018, like earlier before you moved to Nashville in like September of 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And you pretty much already had it.
I feel like I had that title from the
It
beginning.
might have been in Utah.
Yeah.
that
See,
you
now
got
I'm
it.
wondering, like, when did I open? No, that's not right. Like, when did I first start Jingle or Fight or Flight Master 2020? No, that doesn't make any
That's
sense.
not real. That's not real.
Yeah, but I guess I didn't. I mean, I know where the title came from. It came from I was doing like, thank you. I was doing like trauma studies, reading books on trauma, and The Body Keeps the Score is a really good book if you haven't read that. And it's about how like you store trauma in your body, and the fight or flight instinct like literally gets stuck in you. You know, it sounds really woo woo, but it makes a lot of sense. And it's metaphorical and literal at the same time. And, you know, the poems I was writing were about the trauma of my divorce, which I know, like, some people, I think they think that sounds kind of silly, like, it's not that traumatizing to get a divorce. Well, for me, it really was. I mean, it was a real disappointment. Until I realized that I no longer was in love with the person that I'd been with all this time. And that was just a really weird... It's like almost realizing you're like German instead of American. You know, it's just like, who am I? You know, I'm the person who's in love with this person. Like, that's who I am. Not anymore. So that loss of identity was really, really. Oh, and I also was like, I'm never gonna have kids. It's like never gonna happen. And you know, what's absent in the book is like, you know, just all the like, because who wants to read about this? But like all the like dating that I was doing to like try to find, you know, the right person, which worked. I got to Karen, and I'm very happy now. But like, that was not. Lana's probably laughing right now. That was not a good experience. Like one for the ages, not a good experience. And so, there was a lot of just like trauma. You're trying to have a family. You're trying, you know, like it was, you know, Karen will say that it was sort of this, it was like, you know, like you're a woman who's trying to have children, but you're having fertility issues. Like, it's like, what's the difference? Like, I was having fertility issues in that I couldn't find the right person to have a family with, you know? And so, yeah, like that title emerged early, and I never looked back. One, it's just a good title. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's kind of hard to argue with it. Fight or flight. Like, why hasn't someone written a book of poetry called this? Like, it blew my mind when I Amazoned it that there was like one book, I think, of like fiction, and that was it, that had the same title. Well, then there was a million books about fight or flight, but there was no like creative writing, you know, about book called Fight or Flight other than that one. And it didn't look like, you know, it was doing a whole lot, you know? So I was like, okay, if this is a really popular book, I would shy away from this. So it was just a good title, and I just really loved it. I was able to form my book around it. Okay. Those are your questions. If you have more or something, you know, if you have any questions for me later on in your journey, I'm very easy to find. I'm the only person in the world with my name. So you can find me on Facebook and Instagram and my website and all those places. Yeah, if anything else comes up, let me know. Thanks a lot.